Hello everybody, Wild Bill for America here, and as most of you have probably heard, I was recently en route to Calgary, Alberta, Canada to give a speech at an anti-Islam rally, but when I arrived at the airport, I was arrested, interrogated, and detained for 7.5 hours. Now, I served as a law enforcement officer for 20 years, and I know proper police procedures. What the Canadian Border Police officers did was disgraceful. When I arrived in Canada, I was directed to the security area where officers Jackman and Reddle went through my luggage and my iPad. They asked me about the event that I was speaking at and read my notes that were on the iPad for the speech. They read the speech word for word on my iPad. The speech was about the abuse of women and children under Islamic Sharia law, and believe it or not, the speech was also about the importance of freedom of speech. One line in the speech was that I was there to speak to the Canadians who believe that all citizens should be free to speak their mind without fear of being dragged off by the authorities. But before I could give the speech, I was dragged off by the authorities. Now, fortunately, though, I gave that same speech in Jacksonville, Florida, a few weeks ago, and it has now been posted on my YouTube channel under the title, Wild Bill's Anti-Hate Hate Speech. You can watch it there to see for yourself what officers Jackman and Reddle considered to be an arrestable offense. After a long interrogation session, they retreated behind closed doors to consult with their supervisor. Then they finally came out and told me that they were taking me into custody for smuggling. Smuggling hate speech on my iPad. I wish I could have seen the look on my face when they said that. They called the U.S. consulate and told them that they had, quote, arrested a foreign national. They gave me a phone call so I could call an attorney. Several times I demanded to see the statute that I was accused of violating, and Officer Jackman promised to get that for me, but after 7.5 hours in custody, I never did see it. I was held for hours, apparently because of the notes that I had written to myself on my own iPad, notes that nobody else was going to see. I was arrested for hate speech that I never spoke. Were they accusing me of committing a hate speech crime against myself? Now finally, after I'd sat on that hard steel chair for hours, they told me they'd decided that they were not going to charge me criminally. No surprise there. Even with Canada's screwy hate speech laws, I absolutely did not believe that writing myself a note could possibly be a criminal offense. But they said they were confiscating my iPad, and I protested. I told them that I have over 6 years worth of notes on that iPad and over 1,000 files that I need for my Wild Bill for America mission. They said that because I was applying for entry into Canada that they had the right to seize it. So I said, what if I withdraw my application for entry into Canada? And that sent them scurrying back to their supervisor for another long powwow. They came back and said, fine. Told me I could leave, but they were still keeping my iPad. They said they were going to send it to Ottawa for a, quote, forensic investigation. And then they added a new threat. They said they were going to refer it to the taxing authority to determine the appropriate tariff to slap on the smuggled goods. My own words. Now that is clearly a threat to harm me financially. Then they escorted me to a concourse, put me on a plane back to the USA. Now this was outrageous conduct for any police officer to engage in. It was clearly an attempt to use their law enforcement authority to harass and intimidate. And what really violates proper police conduct and ethics were their attempts to create a crime where none existed, simply for the purposes of intimidation. Because the Canadian government doesn't want people giving speeches about protecting women and children and calling for freedom of speech for all citizens. This detention was without merit. Their threats of legal action was nothing but bluff and bluster, actions unbecoming of professional law enforcement officers. Now, was I singled out for this treatment? Quite possibly. There was a vocal group of left-wing extremists who were complaining to the Canadian government and demanding that I be kept from coming into Canada. Were Jackman and Reddle ordered to find something, anything, to bust me on? Probably won't know for sure until we get discovery in court. Holding me for smuggling my own words is pretty silly. And the fact that that was the best that they could come up with tells me that they were determined and probably under orders to bust me for something. Now, they knew that I'd been a law enforcement officer for 20 years, and Jackman told me the reason that they did not handcuff me was because I am a former law enforcement officer. But my personal belief is that they didn't handcuff me because they knew they had nothing on me, and putting me in chains would probably put them in legal jeopardy. It's clear to me that the government of Canada was determined to make an example out of me and to send a message to others who dare to stand for freedom and to oppose Islamic oppression. Now, I will say that Officers Jackman and Rettel were not rude to me in any way. They bullied and harassed me very politely, and I appreciate that. But as a lawman, I refuse to be intimidated by bad cops, and it hacks me off to see men who wear the uniform conduct themselves as bullies to intimidate citizens for political purposes. And now I send a message to the Canada Border Services Agency. I demand that you immediately return the iPad that was unlawfully taken from me during the unlawful detention. I further warn that I am exploring all legal remedies both here in the USA and in Canada. I strongly suggest that you pack up that iPad and ship it to my home without delay. And if you tamper with it, if you delete any content, or if you add anything to it, I will pursue full legal remedies. This is not over. The Canadian authorities are looking for some way to make an example out of me. They may try to prosecute me if they can think of something a bit less silly than charging me with smuggling my own words. They may try to hit me with a huge tariff on my words. We shall see. And if they're half as smart as they think they are, they will drop this nonsense immediately, return my iPad without delay, and send a letter of apology signed by Officers Jackman and Rettel and their supervisor, because he was probably behind most of this nonsense. Now, I want the Canadian people to think about the ramification of their actions. With the precedent that they have set, what might happen to a little old lady who walks through that airport with one of Brigitte Gabriel's books under her arm? Or if somebody has a note in their pocket reminding them to attend an Act for America rally? Are they going to be hooked up for hate speech? I really don't think the people of Canada want their law enforcement officers representing their country in this way. Bottom line, I was detained, intimidated, threatened, and harassed by government agents because I hold political beliefs that are conservative. Now, think about this for a moment. The Canadian Border Police ambushed me because I had blasphemed Islam. Canadian law enforcement officers carrying out the demands of Sharia law in dealing with an infidel. Now, I know that was not their intention, but that is what their actions are to the Islamic community. This is definitely not over. I intend to continue my mission to stand with courage for the men, women, and children who are victims of Islamic violence and intimidation. And now I'm adding a new mission, identifying law enforcement officers who misuse their authority to intimidate and abuse citizens simply because those citizens stand up for traditional Western values. Now, as this scenario unfolds, I will be relying heavily on my friends and supporters because I'm basically taking on the whole Canadian government. And I intend to use this incident to expose the absolute unfairness and dangers of hate speech laws. And here's a wild bill bullet of truth. Hate speech laws, when enacted, are the death knell of freedom to any Western nation. This is Smuggler Bill, bringing this information to you. Thank you for watching, and America and Canada bless God again.